All right, we're live.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
All right, we're live with BWX Academy. We have our host, go ahead, Rodrigo, and we have our member Maka joining us today for this discussion on how to make translation income reach new heights through Gen AI BWX. Go ahead, Rodrigo, if you'd like to just present the series and tell the people what this is all about. Take it.
Yeah, thank you. Well, BWX Academy, it's a good opportunity to you to understand how our platform works and understand in detail how you can operate, how you can create your project, how you can leverage our AI connection in your project. So feel free. We are hosting this webinar once a week on Wednesday. So yeah, stay tuned to our next event. And let's take this moment also to introduce Maka. Would like to introduce yourself? I think Maka she's in a bit, but
All right, no worries. Maka, can you hear us? Yeah, I think
Yes,
Maka's
yes, I can.
okay. So, would you like to introduce yourself?
Okay, I'm Macarena. I'm working with BWX as community manager. I also translate, so I'm also a translator. I work from English into Spanish and specialize in the fields of health and well-being. And as many other translators, I'm trying to learn and understand more about artificial intelligence and how it's going to be a part of our everyday lives from now on. So I think this is gonna be a very interesting session.
Perfect. All right. So, and before I share my screen, I just want to say, please, everybody, feel free to add questions to the comments. Our goal is to get through as many questions as possible. This is meant to be an interactive discovery session. It's not meant to be just me blabbering and demoing. I'm going to try to be as detailed as I can so that the end goal is that you really feel comfortable using BWX as a tool to reach new income heights. So without ado, I'm going to share my screen. Just make sure I have the right window. Perfect. All right. Can everybody see my screen?
yes.
Perfect. So this is BWX. It's it's our translation tool editor. It does a bunch of things, from cost management to quote management to placing jobs with people, giving people different rights and privileges. It's a very comprehensive translation management system and platform. But today we're going to focus on the AI component. And I'm going to first give you a glimpse of what we're talking about when we talk about AI, and I'm going to use an example here in Spanish. So here we have let me open actually one that's not translated. And let me go into translation settings. I don't want to auto translate anything. Perfect. Actually, let me do that in the organizational unit. And so just so everybody understands, the organizational unit is an umbrella concept that has settings for a specific company or client group, anything that you think is particularly important. So now I turn this off, translation memory and machine translation as an auto translation tool. Now I'm going to create a new project within BureauWorks. And I'm not going step by step, but again, feel free to ask me any questions. Just created the project. I selected our homepage here. I'm going to click on next. Once I select our organizational units, BureauWorks, it'll know the translation memory, the glossaries, the languages that we're working with. Let me change French Canada to French France as an example. and web demo. Okay, I'm going to create the project. I'm only going to use 2 workflow steps for the purposes of this demo, but you can add many others as needed. And now we're creating the project. Let me just make sure that in translation settings, yeah, now this is off. Perfect. So now we've created the work units. Let's open this work unit here in Spanish, and it's calculated the cost automatically. I'm not going to go into this right now, but it does cost management as well. Now when we open the translation project, I have the preview here down here. Now, right now, we're using the document preview, but I'm going to switch to the web preview because it's cooler. So let's switch over to the web preview. Okay. Now we have the web preview, and this is in Spanish. What happens now when I click on any given segment, BWX is using AI, and it's trying to make sense of the green stuff, which is coming from the translation memory, the blue stuff that's coming from a machine translation engine, and you can configure DeepL, Google, Amazon, others. In this case, it's configured with Microsoft. And the yellow stuff is the glossary. Now, notice how in this case, you have a context match coming from the translation memory, but let's say I don't like tabla de precios. Let's say I just want to say precios. If I add that to the glossary and teach it that, now I updated the term, and now I ask AI to translate it. Even though I have a context match that says tabla de precios, it's learning from my change and it's suggesting precios, right? So that's number one. It's learning in runtime. And let me show with a more complex sentence how this works. In this sentence, you have BWX is a cloud-based translation management system. We taught the engine a lot of things, and some of things are wrong. For instance, we misspelled compleja with an X instead of a J. Notice that it fixed it in the implementation. We taught it that manage was administrar, and it translated as una plataforma de administración. Notice that it's different, for instance, than the machine translation that's a sistema de gestión. So these are synonymous, but and in the TM it also had gestión, but it's trying to apply the glossary that we're teaching it as best as it can. And I'm going to stop right here because I already dumped a bunch load of information. Before I go into anything else, I want to ask you, Maka, what's clear, what's not clear, what should we go over? Tell us.
No, so far everything is clear, I think. What happened to me when I started using the platform was that I couldn't see the artificial intelligence feature. So maybe if you could show how to activate it, because otherwise when you
Perfect.
start using it,
that was perfect. That's exactly my next segue. Before I go into that, Rodrigo, do you have any questions from you or from comments?
From comments, we don't have any questions so far. So far, so good. So yeah, I think what you are showing, it's a web preview, right? It's how
Over here, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a web preview. Mm-hmm.
Nice.
So let's say over here, let's say if we translate get started and we apply the target, you can see that it's reflecting the translation. But let's go into what Maka said, because I think that's super important. If we go into BWX, when you first create an account with us, your AI will be by default turned off. So step number one is to go into my account and click here, enable AI translation review. Now, when I click this, it gives me a big warning, data privacy and security warning. It says, please be aware that by enabling this feature, you're authorizing BWX to share content data in encrypted form with via API with GPT models hosted by OpenAI and Microsoft Azure. According to their practices, your data will not be used for training purposes, will be stored for 30 days with encryption at rest, and then permanently deleted. Their full privacy policies are here. And in order to activate, you do have to type word for word, I have read and agree to activate the AI feature. And once you do it, it'll become green. I'll accept it. So that's step number one. super important. And there's a new feature, Maka, that we added. It's particularly useful for enterprises where you can configure your own, you can route our AI to your own OpenAI instance or to your own Azure instance. So you can add an additional level of privacy. Before I move from this screen, though, I do want to emphasize this is what Microsoft ensures in their data privacy. And I do want to read it because I think it's important. It says your prompts, the inputs, and the completion. So basically, all the data that's flowing is not available to other customers. It's not available to OpenAI. It's not used to improve OpenAI models, not used to improve Microsoft or third-party products or services, not used for automatically improving Azure OpenAI models, and it's available exclusively for your use. So that's something very important. I particularly, as an individual person, I feel comfortable with these guarantees. I trust Microsoft. I understand that there are a lot of people for different reasons don't trust Microsoft as a person. I respect that. As a company, I respect that. I on one hand, I trust Microsoft just like I trust AWS as far as data management and privacy goes. So yeah, I think it's important to emphasize that aspect. And like I said, once you enable this, now AI will be active. But there are two more steps that are important to keep in mind. If for any reason you want to turn off the AI or on at the editor level, if you click here on Documents, that's this little paper. If I click here, and I can turn on or off translation smells, AI review, and AI translation. And notice, for instance, if I turn off AI review, for instance, you don't see this little a little button that will come on if I translate the AI review. And if I click on AI review, what it does is it's looking for an alternative way of saying the same sentence. So it's suggesting comience ahora instead of empiece ahora, and it's explaining why that the suggestion is more accurate and natural. Empiece ahora is also valid, but comience is more commonly used. So that's the AI's opinion. I can choose to apply that or not. So yeah, I think that was a great question, Maka. Does that answer your question or?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Okay, so now just going over the AI different aspects, right? So we have one feature that I was showing that's called the generative language engine. So if I go in here to suggestion, here's an example. We have in the glossary manage as administrar, but in the sentence administrar doesn't make any sense because there's no subject verb agreement. So it flexed it to administra. Now, let's change this to, what would you like to change this to, Maka? Gestionar, gestione, any other synonym, something that you would like to see here?
Yeah, anything works.
You tell me.
Yeah, gestiona is okay.
Gestiona. Now, if we change this, now it's agreeing with the machine translation. If we ask AI to translate it, now it's trying to gestiona las traducciones a tu manera. So the generative language engine is trying to make sense of glossary in yellow, machine translation in blue, TM in green. As a translator, you no longer have fuzzy matches because every match that you get has already been resolved. So there's no more fuzzy matching to be made, comparing the TM and looking at the TM differences and at the source and the target and transferring over. The role, the generative language engine gives you a good enough feed that your role is basically to read over and say, no, I don't like this, and I want to change something. And then you can always change things at the editor level or at the glossary level, right? Now, the second component is what we call BWX translation smells. So I removed the idea of manera, and smells is flagging an incomplete translation. It's saying the translation is incomplete. and does not provide the full meaning of the original phrase, it should be revised and completed. So if I add back manera, in theory, smell should go away, and it does go away. So what smells is a semantic verifier. So what most of us, at least I am, are used to syntactical QA issues. So when I go into filters, these are examples of syntactical QA issues. So a doubled word, missing tags, incorrect characters, target dilation. These are syntactical things. BWX smells is looking at semantical things. It's when the meaning is different and it picks up potentially on things like awkwardness, things that may not sound natural, things that may sound wrong. As we go through this, hopefully we'll get a few different kinds of smells warnings, but it's a syntactical operator. And then the third component is the AI review, which is essentially asking the AI to be a second set of eyes looking at the translation. In this case, it does not have access to the glossary, does not have access to the TM. We're trying to emulate how, let's say, a reader would look at your translation without the context that the translator has. And it's suggesting administra las traducciones a tu manera. And in the glossary, we have in the target, we have gestiona las traducciones a tu manera. So that's the difference. The AI is suggesting administra, we have gestione. Okay. So so far so good. Rodrigo, Maca, so far so good.
Yes, so far so good. We have a question here, but I think it's about if it's possible upload an old TM into BWX.
100%. Yeah, you can, as long as it's in TMX formats, and you go into translation memories, which is here. You can create a TM, and then you can import the TMX file over here. So yeah, it's 100% capable to import old TMs so that they work with BWX. Great question.
So a question now, it's for example, if I'm a translation agency and I already have a TM already prepared, for example, for medical industry, so I can upload all these memories, and as soon as I will improving my memory, I can share all this knowledge among all my clients, right? So
Yes. So for instance, you can create one translation memory here, but let's say you can create like a medical translation memory as an example, but you can share that, for instance, with different. If you go into translation memories, now I'm in an organizational unit, you can say, okay, I want to read from my medical, but I only want to write to my client medical TM and so on. So you can create these different configurations, penalties, thresholds, etc. So you can create it like a cluster of translation memory management. Yeah. It can get pretty complicated, but it's very flexible in that respect.
Nice. Well, Maca asked, can we upload, let me highlight Maca's question. Can we upload other software files and work here if we like it more? Atrados one, for example.
Yes, let me pull up here, BWX supported files. There we go. So these are the supported extensions that we have. And Rodrigo, if you can type this in the chat, I think it's always good for people to be able to have access to this.
Okay.
So essentially, Maca's question, most extensions coming from other translation tools fall into these categories. They're either XLF, XLIF, XLIF2, or SDLXLIF files. We support all of them. I think it's important to note, though, that when you do that, tagging becomes very important, particularly to ensure that when you import it back to the tool that you use to export it, everything is flawless. So it's very important when you translate, doing that at the end of the translation, you run the QA issues and you ensure that you have the tags settings all turned on so that you ensure that the compatibility is going to be seamless. So, but great question, Maka.
Okay, thank you.
So, okay, something that comes up very often in Spanish, right? Tú versus usted. You get the same thing in French, tú versus vous. It depends on the context, the formality, the style, the region. There are different things that impact that choice, right? But let's say for this particular client, it's right now the engine is using you as tú. Let's teach it that your is in the sense of usted. See what happens here. We're not, and again, this is not a one-to-one correspondence, right? It's not going to work de usted manera. But let's see, just curious here, let's see what the AI is going to do now that we taught it that your should be usted. See? If we apply the translation, gestiona las traducciones a su manera, because it's understanding that we're using usted instead of tú. So that's super useful. You know, it happens a lot to me when I'm translating into Spanish, having to keep changing to it for usted for a more formal register or for certain clients that operate in certain countries. And what's interesting is that, again, very differently from traditional glossaries where you're learning, let's say, you is tú or you is usted, and it's learning just rigidly. In this case, notice that I taught your as usted, and it completely changed usted to su in order to make sense in the sentence. So it's a lot more, it's what we call, the Gen AI emulates context awareness. So I'm not saying that it is context aware, because awareness is a very loaded word, but it's definitely behaving as if it were aware linguistically. So, Maka, as a linguist, any questions or comments regarding this thing?
No, but Elias has a question. Can you see it when we pop it up?
No, I don't see
Oh,
questions.
okay.
I'm just seeing
So
my screen.
he asks if the program learns from translation memories and glossaries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's learning from, the green is coming from translation memories, the blue is learning from machine translation, and the yellow is learning from glossaries. And it's learning with different impact and weighting. So for instance, in the way we've configured it for this demo, the glossary is more important than anything else. The machine translation is way more important. Sorry, the translation memory is way more important than the machine translation, but the weighting is dynamic. And because it's probabilistic, you do have cases where, for instance, it will override a glossary decision if it thinks it's incorrect, or if it won't work, or if it's going to be too repetitive. But essentially, when you go into BWX and you create a glossary, for instance, you can import a TBX file here as well. So you can import TBX files. Here's an example of a glossary with a bunch of languages. And this is the glossary itself that we're referring to. Same thing with the translation memory. You create the translation memory. All the segments you can search through over here. It's loading. So this is the translation memory. And you can always, like, let's say, add or change, delete. You can manage the translation memory from within BWX. And then when you're translating, we're not just learning, but we're teaching through the glossary and the translation memory. So instead of, let's say, we're used to the translation memory and the glossary being basically syntactical knowledge management tools. So the idea is you have a sentence and we measure edit distance, what we call Levenshtein edit distance. So we measure that Levenshtein edit distance, and if the syntactical distance is close enough, it'll suggest a match. Sometimes a 100% match, a 50% match, a 74% match. But the match level is based on the syntactical similarity between the source and two sources, really. The source that has been translated and the new source. That's what produces a translation memory feed. Same thing with glossary. You're measuring the similarity of a word and the word that's in the glossary, with less flexibility typically than translation memory. What our tool is doing is we're using semantic analysis as opposed to syntactic analysis. So we're not just taking into account edit distance, we're taking into account meaning. Is the meaning similar? So think about like a concordance search that you do as a translator, where like you only look for a part of the sentence. So like, let's say you want to search in the TM, just as an example here, search TM, the concordance search, and you say translation. Yeah, here you go. Actually, that's full text search contains English. Okay, here you go. So you can search in the TM for the word translation, even though you don't have the full match in a given segment. BWX, our AI is doing the same thing, but in an autonomous way. So it's looking for similar meaning, not just similar syntax. Yeah, but great question, yes.
Thank you. And Konstantinos is asking if this also work with Greek.
Yes, let's create a project in Greek. Same process, new project, browse for the files, or you can drag the files. Here we go. Now we're going to select the org unit. Now let's add Greek. Let me remove a few other languages in this project. Let's add Thai as well. So now in this project, we have Chinese, Japanese, Thai. Let's add Korean as well. So we've added a few different languages. Demo web. Here we go. Now we're creating the project. I'm going to remove a workflow because I don't need it. Translation and review. So now you can see here the targets are German, Greek, and so on. Let's go into translation settings. Perfect. Now let's go into Greek. Let's turn on the preview. And let's go into get started. And here you have the Greek feeds as well. Very similar concept, so not very different. I can always make changes if I'd like. I don't speak any word of Greek, Konstantinos, but what you can notice is that, and without speaking a word of Greek, you notice that right now I don't have anything in the TM, but notice that the machine translation is slightly different than the AI feed, because the AI is learning from the machine translation, learning from the glossary, and trying to improve on these things. So that's an example in Greek. Let's take a look at how it looks like in Japanese. Same concept. In this case, I do have something in the translation memory. Let's see, in this case, I do have something in the glossary, and same thing, you can notice how the glossary is in one way, the translation memory, the machine translation is another. In this case, I do have something confirmed. Let's see translation smells in Japanese. Let's delete a few things. And it's detecting an incomplete translation, and it's saying it's incomplete and should be this. So that's an example in Japanese. Let's take a look at Korean.
Gabriel,
Yes.
could you please zoom in your web browser a bit, because Constantino was sharing that the letter. I think it's the whole demonstration, right, Constantinos? It's yeah. No, it's nice.
This is too much. I can't see the suggestion. This is, I think, good enough.
Yeah.
But it's the same concept, Konstantinos. I mean, it definitely, whether you like it or not, I would love to hear your feedback, but it does work for over 200 languages. Same concept here, like we can teach it terms. So let's say, for instance, I want to teach it that cloud-based should be something else. I can add the term. Let's just look at it. Cloud-based synonyms. Greek. See if I can find something. I'm not looking. Bad example, Konstantinos. I'm not looking for something. Not finding something good here. Let me see here. Something else. Maybe you can give me something, an example of something that you'd like to see it applied, and we can teach it. And yeah, feel free to add in the comments. I'll be happy to add the term to the glossary, and we'll ask AI to translate and see how it handles it in Greek with any of these sentences. And meanwhile, while you think of an example, let me just show you a few other languages. Thai, I don't think I had opened it. Same concept. So here you have the feeds happening in Thai. Let's pull up the web preview because I always like to see previews in Thai. And here you go, get started. You see the preview in Thai happening as well. So yeah, it works for over 200 languages. Some languages it may work a bit better than others. So far, we haven't had that feedback. It works very consistently across languages. Some domains it may work a little bit better than others, but the concept of learning is the same regardless of languages. It's basically learning from a fluid linguistic corpus as opposed to a static, rigid one. So, and do we have the suggestion from Konstantinos Urgigo or no?
No, he didn't suggest anything, but he shared it. He will check it out and will register and check our software. But we have a list of questions here. I don't know.
Great. I love questions. Go for it. That's what we need.
Yeah, nice. Elias, let me highlight this one. The web preview only works for website translations.
The web preview works for any contents available on the web. So it could be an app, as long as it's available on the web and you can authenticate and sign into it, it works for any web-based content, really. So whether it's in a site or not.
Yeah, and traditional documents also. It's code preview, video preview. Yeah.
So right now, for instance, I uploaded a docx file. So if I go back to docs preview, I'll be able to see how the docx looks like. When I enable the web preview, then it switches over. I can show you, we also have the video preview capability that time codes, time references the segment to the video, and you can navigate through that. But yeah, these are the different kinds of preview that we offer. And the code preview is particularly useful for software localization, where you can see, let's say, whether a developer is leaving a comment inside the code. You can see the overall structure inside the code as well. I mean, we do show the keys within BWX, but seeing the code preview can be particularly useful in software localization.
Great.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Yes, Martin is asking, he says, hi, great demonstration. Martin here. Is there a way to place the tags on the target segments?
Yes,
Maybe
in this case, you don't have tags to be placed because I created a text only, but the tags will be carried over automatically by AI to the target. And here's a good example of something that we taught it. So just a side note to Martin's question. I had taught that work should be AGA. The AI is trying to apply that. It's applying that. It doesn't make any sense, but the transition smells is flagging the error. So that's pretty cool how you have this added layer of verification. And as far as Martin's questions, if we create a document with a lot of tags, you'll be able to not only see the tags in the source, see the tags in the target. You can here in the configurations, you can decide to show the expanded tags over here. Right now it's off, but you can turn them on. And the AI does a pretty good job at carrying the tags over. And one of the things our engineers are working on is a feature that fixes tags, incorrect tags or mismatched tags automatically with the click of a button. So that's in the works. It's going to be hot off the oven in the next few weeks.
Thank you, Gabriel. We have another question. It's from John. He asks, can we do a group thing with other translators here and work on the same project, like a little small team?
Yeah, that's a great question, Maka. You were just asking me this, and we do plan on having maybe not the next one, but one BWX Academy just focused on group work and sharing.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, there are two basic ways in which you can collaborate with people. If you go back here to the BWX homepage, and you go into my account. When you sign up, you have you're sign on the on the professional plan. You have 1 active seat. Now you can come here and manage plan, and you can add more seats. You can see in this case, because this is our own plan, we allowed ourselves 2,000 seats, even though I'm only using 62. So step 1, make sure that you have more seats available in your account. So that's a very important thing. Assuming you have seats available, all you have to do is go into users, add user. So in this case, you have very few required fields. Basically, shared translator as an example, their email, shared at gmail.com, just as an example, and the org unit that you want to place them in. That's very important. So if you don't give them access to their specific organizational unit, they won't be able to see the translation. So this is step 2, inviting the user over, making sure that their status is active. Otherwise, the user is not enabled, and giving them a role. A role is very important. And this is where it bifurcates. You can collaborate with other translators by onboarding them as a vendor or as a project manager. And I'll explain the difference. If you onboard them as a vendor, what they'll see in BWX is they'll have the translator perspective. So they'll only be able to see tasks that have been placed to them. So if you go here into tasks, inside a project, and you assign the task to a specific translator, then they'll have access to that specific task, right? Now, and you click the green button. So now they have access to the specific task. If you don't do that, they won't have access to anything. And the minute the vendor completes the task, that's going to be gone from their dashboard. So there's the vendor route, which is very limited access and is great because it can create an automatic log file based on the work they performed. They only get access for a very limited amount of time to the things that they need to see, and yeah, it's very effective from a management perspective.
And
Now,
do we get these extra seats with the freelance subscription, or is it a different one?
no, the freelance subscription goes up to 9 seats. Starting from 10 seats, then you migrate to the business one, which has a minimum of 10 seats. But it's also less expensive per seat. So the freelance version is $9 per seat per month, and you can go up to 9. And then if you have to add more than that, then you would migrate into the business, which is $8 per seat per month, and you can go up to $299. But great question. So the difference, most translators that I know wouldn't want the vendor route. The vendor route is more for an agency, for an enterprise client, so for someone who wants very strict access control, very strict cost measurement, creating very clear quality data around how the different vendors are performing, and so on. Most translators collaborate more informally. The easiest way to do that would be to invite the user, but instead of inviting them as, here we go into permissions, instead of inviting them as a vendor, we would invite them as a project manager. Now, if they're a project manager, they'll see everything here that's in the project. So you can, for instance, open up the same work unit. As an example, we can open the one that we were working in Spanish, just as an example. So let's say we can open this one, and I can tell Maca, let's split this. I'll take segments 1 through 100. Actually, I'll take segments 1 through 50. You take segments 50 through 95, for instance, and we can work together on the same file. If you want to split it more strictly, then all you would do was upload the files broken up, and then you'd be able to share it that way as well. But those are there are many alternatives, but the interesting part is that no matter how you share it, when you go into a translation memory feed here as an example, and you take a look at all the information is recorded. So who created it, who modified it, um, what happened to it. If I take a look at there's a lot of work that we put into version history as well. So over here, I can see exactly who changed what, when, where. So there's a lot of effort that we place around group work, collaboration, and then being able to trace back where the translation is coming from.
Thank you.
But
And
that's a great question, and I think it's a great topic for one of our future academies for sure.
yes, and I think Bridget here is asking something that we could also take into account. She asks, can you possibly provide a brief demo of a localization project, say a one-page website into 5 languages, cloud connected into BWX? Maybe we could do like a small demonstration, not now, but to think of it for our next session, like a
Sure,
small collaborative localization project from
I
start to
think
end.
I think it's a great idea. We can definitely, and we can do it together. Yeah, we can. I can do one part, you can do another. We can work on it live. Absolutely, that's a great point.
Mhm. And
Any
then,
other? Mhm.
yeah, Constantinos is asking if we are basically not translating per se, but using commands to manipulate the software. He's worried that we're not translating anymore, just asking the artificial intelligence how to translate.
That's a good question. I don't see it that way, Konstantinos. I see it as actually more sophisticated. One of the things that we worry about is how do we have all of this technology enhance the human creative spirit and critical capability. And in our opinion, there's actually a much more valuable activity taking place, not just translation, which is supervised machine translation, supervised machine learning training, basically. So, for instance, right, if I'm just translating, let me just pick up a sentence. Maybe I'll change something here and I'll just go at the segment level and say, no, I don't want método sistema, I want plataforma, and maybe I don't want to change precedentes for conocimiento. I just start making changes or even just wipe it out from scratch and start from, I translate on my own. And that is going to teach the engine, but if I'm able to work more with the feeds that I'm providing, if I'm able to work more at the terminological level, for instance, what's going to happen is that not only am I going to I'm not just going to perform my translation, I'm going to make it easier for the next time around that either I do the translation or someone else works in content similar to mine, provided like in an agency scenario, right, where you have multiple translators working together. Sometimes you get the content, sometimes I get the content. I'm making the life easier for the next person to work within that environment. Like within BWX, the training is unique to your own account. So let's say if Maka trains BWX, it's going to be trained in Maka, isolated in Maka's environment. If I train it in a different way, those two trainings are never going to be shared. But the interesting perspective is that you're no longer just translating, you're actually teaching an engine. And that's why one of the terms that we're exploring is you're not just translating, you're becoming a language flow architect or a language flow engineer. You're taking a deeper look at how language is produced and trying to teach the engine in a way that makes sense for the translation process as a whole. And that opens a whole other array of questions. How do you compensate for that? How do you account for that? How do you teach that? It's there's a lot more questions than I have answers to, but it's about in if anything making the art of translation more valuable as opposed to less valuable, I would say.
Yeah, I like one analogy regarding that. It's like a pilot. We know a pilot. We all know the 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 airplanes today. We know they aren't managing exactly all part of the process. It's fully automatic, and I still believe they are, managing it. So I think it's kind of similar. We know all the airplanes today, almost everything it's automatic. So we still need a pilot, to manage exceptions and things like that. I like this analogy.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good analogy, but it goes even deeper than that. So think about one thing is exception management, sure, and that's a natural derivation of automation, right? So it's like you mentioned in the airplane example, you have all these systems that run in a semi-autonomous way, and for specific situations, the pilot will take over for landing. The pilot may take over for specific maneuvers, for exceptions, and things like that. What we're talking about is something a little bit different. It's as if the plane were learning from the pilots, so that every plane flies differently according to the style of a different pilot. And again, in the language, that's kind of what we're talking about, right? If you think about it, every plane is different, right? A marketing campaign in French for 25-year-olds living in Paris is going to read very differently than the same campaign targeting 50-year-old females in Bordeaux, for instance. That's just one example, but it's just language is very audience specific. It's very translator specific. It's style specific. It's domain specific, and that's the beauty of the engine, is that you're teaching it a certain style as opposed to letting it run for you. So I
Yeah,
think,
and
go ahead.
know that there are some subtleties that the robot is never going to get, like the example sentence I shared with you yesterday, I think, that it says
Mm-hmm.
a doctor meets a nurse and a CEO in a hospital, and the
Mm-hmm.
automatic translations assumes the doctor is male, the CEO is male, and the nurse is a female, but
Mm-hmm.
it's only humans that can actually like know the subtleties of the language and create human translations, because as I always think, a robot will never have a kid to hug. A robot will never have fear of losing a loved person. A robot will never know how it feels to fail an exam. That's something only humans know, and only humans know humans. So I think a human translator will always be needed for some kind of contents. For other kinds of contents that are more robotic and that we don't need a human touch in them, then yes, we can leave that to the automatic translation 100%. Like Airbnb reviews, we don't need
Mm-hmm.
a human person like translating thousands and thousands of reviews every minute. So that's a
Yeah, it's
more
interesting to
like,
say that. I'm still seeing a gray area in between what you're talking about, which is a review. For instance, you're talking about Airbnb reviews, right? There are many Airbnb reviews that are filled with subtleties. Some people spend a lot of time writing them. There's a lot of richness potentially in them that gets lost in an automatic translation. What I'm proposing, or we're proposing, I think, as a company, is really a situation where you have, let's say, a review that's translated by an engine that has been learning from me as a review translator. And let's say I taught it, for instance, in this case, engine. I want to say that engine is sistema. This is an example. It's picking up that it's a noun. I taught it. I replaced this. Now I'm going to ask AI to translate this. And now it's trying to apply the idea of sistema. It's learning terminologically. I taught it that you should be did. So it's using that as well. So it's learning from the tone, it's learning from the register, it's learning, it's molding itself according to me. And the beauty of the technology is that it's not we're used to thinking, and I think that's what's so cool about the examples that both you and Rodrigo are bringing up, is that most of us were used to thinking it as automatic or human, autonomous or human. And I don't think that we're talking about that anymore. I think we're talking about a place in between these things where the autonomous capabilities enable further the human spirits. That's kind of like where I'm seeing it. So it's like a situation where it's not like, oh, these are just Airbnb reviews, let's just process them through automatic translation. No, let's translate them in a way that's super cost effective, that's going to be almost as cost effective as automatic, but it's still going to have the flavor of a human touch. That's my opinion of the beauty of the engine that we're working on, is that it makes very high productivity possible, while at the same time not just respecting but favoring the human creative spirit. So, but I think those are all really good examples that you guys are bringing up.
And Rodrigo, maybe we can read Mohammed question.
Hmm.
Yes, Mohammed.
He's Yeah, I have it here. If yeah,
Okay.
he asks, how does this work with PDFs and scanned documents? Also, could you demo automatic word count and calculating cost? Maybe we can leave the second part of word count and calculating cost for the next demo.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
now,
I can
um,
briefly touch on that, but
oh yeah, sure.
let me just answer the first part. Scan PDFs horribly. That's BWX isn't meant for that. So yeah, the assumption in BWX that we're working with, again, these are the supported files that we work with. They're all assuming that content is editable, readable. There's no added layer of interpretation is required in order to perform a translation project. So yeah, if you're working with scanned PDFs, you would have to use your own methodology to either use an OCR or use something that would transport the PDF into a docx file. Then you can upload the docx file into BWX, then no problem at all. But the assumption is that we're getting an editable file into the platform. So yeah, that's an important clarification. Great question, Mohammed. Now, regarding costs, just going I know we're almost at time, but going very quickly into it. What happens is when you load a document, or it creates what we call these different work units. The costs run, you can see that here in green, the project automation finished. If I click into costs, I can see exactly how these costs were calculated. I have both project level costs, like a project management fee as an example, but I also have the language level costs as well. I can remove or add items here if necessary. But this was all calculated automatically. If I need to change this, I would have to revert the project back to draft. Then I'll be able to edit these. Just as an example, I can add an item such as desktop publishing or glossary building. I can add other additional items. If I'm happy with that, now you can see that the project is in draft. I can change it back to pending and then approve the project once again. So that the costs are there. So basically, that's how the costs are happening, and you can manage the costs in settings, prices, and here you can create different pricing per language pair, and you can also create the different rates per line item as well. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Yeah, Mohammed adds that he was just curious to know whether it has a built-in OCR, which would be amazing, like an
Yeah,
amazing solution because it's one of the, I think, the biggest challenges in our
it's a
industry,
big
how to
challenge.
deal with scanned PDFs.
Yeah, we would
Yes.
have to be born again as another company to do that. So yeah, we're definitely not going into the OCR rabbit hole. I can ensure anyone of that. Even though I agree, I see the value, but it's a whole different technological challenge that we're not ready to tackle.
Yes, definitely. And we don't have any more questions so far. So maybe you want to show us something else.
I think we covered just a very brief recap, right? We're not just translating with machine translation or TMs or glossaries. We're working together with these different sources of information or context in order to teach the engine, right? So, again, just a very simple example. Right now, the machine translation is suggesting traducir a través de nuestro modelo, which is the same as what the AI is suggesting. Now, let's say I want to change this. This is an example. I taught it that translate in this context should be escriba. If I ask AI to translate it, it's trying to apply that. And smells should probably pick up. We'll see if smells does pick up or not. But here, yeah, smells is okay with escriba, but it could have picked up something. But again, the concept is we're teaching the engine in runtime, something that before maybe you would have to spend countless hours training a neural machine translation engine, and even then it would still not be coherent with the translation memory and still may not be coherent with a recent term that was added to the glossary. And in this case, everything has happened in runtimes, right? So here's another example. Let's say
Gabriel,
go ahead, Rodrigo.
sorry interrupted, but there is a question. Elias just asked about the editor.
Yes.
When I open the editor, when I
Someone
open
removed the question.
the, the glossary
Mhm.
box to add a word, I get the option to choose from different parts of speech, nouns, verbs, adverbs, etc. But I don't see that option in the glossary.
Yeah, you probably don't have, if you're getting the option, it's probably you don't have the AI enabled, because like if I click on that term here, notice that it's understanding the part of speech automatically. And it's as far as the glossary, you have to pre-establish that when you're creating the translation project. So when you create the translation project, that's when just going in a project that has been created, for instance, this is where you have to make sure that the glossaries are being added, and you can add any number of glossaries to a translation project.
But
Go ahead.
but can we add, for example, these different parts of speech when we are adding directly into the glossary instead of going to the web editor? That's the question.
Okay,
He
got it,
see,
got it.
yeah,
Let's see. That's a good question. Let's go to glossaries. Not sure if that's. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it should be here. So let's take a look at this term. Yeah, I think the part of speech is hidden from this perspective, but that's something that we could expose here without a problem. Yeah, I think that metadata particularly is not exposed in the glossary perspective. But great point, Elias. That's
yeah,
a
yeah, nice.
good feedback. Perfect. And any more questions, Rodrigo?
One question, but Constantino asked if it's possible on 20,000 words per day
What was the question? I couldn't understand.
in the software, or let me highlight the question again. Let me see if I would shut out 20,000 in one working day. Can the program do that?
It really is depending on how you work with it. I mean, it's technically possible. It certainly is possible from a feasibility perspective. It's contingent on how long does it take you to read, confirm, and make changes to these segments. But yeah, from a technical perspective, it's certainly possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that depends a lot on the translator, because some translators are very unsure about themselves and they doubt everything 100 times. So they will take like 2 hours to produce 500 words, or they are just new in the topic, so they will take also 2 hours to check and recheck 500 words. But as he was saying, like he's been translating for a long time, he knows about the subject matter, he's very fast typing, so he can produce 20K per day. And yeah, sure, with the help of a tool like this one, you can double your productivity.
Yeah, I think, and just going through the comments here, we have a great comment here from Bridget saying that an alternate analogy would be, as far as the AI, is a robotic surgery that requires an expert physician who's also trained in the robotic surgical technology. Yeah, 100%. And Yeah, and also agree that that is a gray area, Bridget. Those are great um, comments. And I think just to wrap up, I think it's important to emphasize this. It's a lot more about asking important questions that open up through the new technology than really not having just pretending that it's not there, right? And I think the key thing is what's happening is we're looking for a way where you're not just, I think one of the main mistakes we made as an industry with machine translation was it was just treated as a way to make translation cheaper, basically. Charge less, pay less, basically. So send out pre-translated files with garbage to translators and say, I'm going to pay you less because it's pre-translated. Basically, I'm oversimplifying, but as an industry, I would say that's what we did. And I think we run a great risk of doing the same thing with AI or similar thing with AI, really just using it as a way to charge less and pay less, charge less and pay less. And I think that's a horrible cycle for us as an industry. I think it's going to destroy the translation profession as we know it if we go down that route. But I also think that there is tremendous appetite for better content, more customized content, more dynamically delivered content. And I think that that's the opportunity. It's how do you use the tool to really enhance the human creative spirit and capability? And I think it's in the subtleties. It's how we interact with the tools. And I think Maka and some of the comments touched on this. How do you train a translator to work with a tool as opposed to against the tool, to understand the difference between my way and a good enough way that's different than my way? So there's so much, so many questions that are open, but I think we're a little over time. And yeah, these are great questions for future sessions. And really want to thank everybody for being here with us. I want to thank you, Rodrigo, for hosting. Maka, I don't know if any of you have any last words before we wrap.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. We had a question that Hugo answered, and it's great because I would like to mention that because we have a webinar series in our YouTube channel that we cover how you can apply and use our platform in Spanish, in Italian, in Arabic, and in other languages. So you can check it out, Mohammed. It's yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Maka. Thank you, everyone, to be here today. And I hope we can see again next week.
All right. Thank you, everybody. See you
Bye.
again.
Thank you.
Same
Thank you,
time, same
everyone.
day next week. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.